So welcome to HiNZ 2017. We're talking with Anne-Marie Cavanagh from Technology and Digital Services in the Ministry of Health. Anne-Marie, thanks for being with us
today.
Thank
you.
I sat in on your opening session this morning, and I must say, and I'll ask all of our viewers, they really need to go back and look at your slides. There's a wealth of information in them, and the drill down, I think, would be just fascinating. There's lots of really good information, so thank you for that.
No problem.
That was really good. A couple of the highlights that we took away from your talk was the discussion about emerging technologies and the impact that's going to have on the health system in New Zealand. Can you just elaborate on those, and so some of the ones that might be top of the chain?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting question, and quite often we get asked the question, which are the technologies that we think are going to be the ones, and it's quite tricky to look at those technologies where we can't make a firm bet to say this one's absolutely going to come through. I think certainly the technologies to watch, maybe a way to think about it, we're seeing huge shifts forwards in terms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and I think the other one that's actually surprised me a little bit by the speed is actual virtual reality and augmented reality. That over the last 2 years has really moved forward. So I think for me it's really around watching which technologies are trending first, both in the consumer environment but also have an application for health. And potentially, impacts in improving, really the healthcare professionals, how they work, can we increase efficiencies, can we reduce frustration? So I think for me, in terms of which technologies, it's always hard to place a bet. But I think for me, the ones that are really striking and moving forward quite quickly are certainly those in artificial intelligence and virtual reality. I think the other piece that we may need to consider around a piece of work that we may need to look at is, looking at the capabilities within New Zealand. Which are the technologies that we may want to be, an adopter first, and then which ones do we want to be a fast follower? So it's trying to also segment those technologies and saying, okay, actually, we may have good, strong capability here, and for that, as an example, I think around virtual reality, it sounds strange, but we see a plethora of new startups in Wellington, and some of the organisations that are coming out of other industries within New Zealand that really mean that we can capitalise on those for training within healthcare, for cognitive behaviour therapy, that we may need to look at and say, actually, maybe this is an area we can grow in. And then, of course, there's areas where we say, actually, let's observe, let's learn, let's see what happens, and let's see how that technology develops.
So that all speaks to what the readiness might be in terms of the sector. There'll be certain technologies and certain aspects of the sector that will be more ready than others.
Yeah, and I think it's also around the readiness of not only the sector but particular areas of the sector. And where do we focus our efforts in making sure that once we decide on the new technology, where is it best placed, and what are the readiness factors that we need to look at so that we can assess to say, actually, we're ready to go in this area.
You also talked, Anne-Marie, about your priorities for the next 12 months, and of course there was a huge amount of work to be done for the strategies and aligning the digital health strategy with the health strategy itself. So can you talk a bit more about what some of those priorities are in the short term?
Sure. So in terms of really the priorities that we're focusing on within my team at the ministry, we're really looking, there was a slide in my presentation where we had 4 pillars almost. So we're looking at, if you think about the top, it was a triangle. So we have leadership and stewardship. So we're looking at what that means for us as stewards of the system. So what does that mean for technology and digital services? Underneath that, we have some work to do to complete the digital health strategy, and that work is underway. So we're looking to further complete that work. On the right hand side, we had electronic health records, so we need to look at really government priorities there, and we need to think around how do we take that project forward. And then at the bottom, there's a large chunk of work that needs to be looked at, and we will continue to build on some of the previous year's work. So particularly if I think around interoperability, last year and the beginning of this year we released the Interoperability Charter, which was agreed and produced in conjunction with NZ And so we need to build on that work to say, okay, we have the charter, now what does that mean? What does that mean for implementation? What does that mean for the vendors? How do we start to select, choose and work with vendors, and how do the vendors respond? Because interoperability will be key to support projects such as electronic health record, but but also to support the concept around a connected ecosystem. So I'd also anticipate some work there to be done. And then if I think about the other pillars, we had investment. So, what's our investment strategy? How do we invest appropriately across the system? And how do we start to communicate that to the system so that we can start to line up our investments in the appropriate way so that we can actually build our digital future? The other pieces that we really need to focus on is also around the infrastructure. So what do we need to do around the infrastructure and what guidance do we need to give? So I think the fundamental pillars at the bottom will continue to build on previous year's work, but continue to collaborate with the sector, but also start to communicate more around really the progress.
And does that investment include, I know social investment has been referred to a whole lot in terms of the national health strategy. Does that, you're thinking more, is it financial investment? When you talk about investment, you're thinking financial.
Yeah.
And where does that fit with social investment?
So the context for me in the presentation today, it's really around the investment around technology. I wasn't really focusing around the social investment. So that's something that is probably a good distinction, so it's good that you bring that up. For me and for the interpretation that we have, really around the investment and the portfolio approach that we need to start to look at for some of our digital technologies.
And I think towards the end of your talk this morning, you talked about some of the key principles in going forward. You mentioned collaboration and so on. Would you just talk to those again? Just what some of those were?
Of course.
The themes, I think they were themes, yes.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit around really collaborating with the sector. So that's something that I'm really keen to look at and to understand how we best collaborate. I think, as you'll see from some of the work that we've been doing around digital health vision and digital health strategy work, there's been a phenomenal effort really in collaboration from the sector. The co-creation of those ideas, it's really been a coming together of ideas to take that work forward, and that's something that I'd really like to see. And I think also the collaboration piece is critical for us within the system, because if you look at the complexity and also some of the technology trends that I see coming forward, we need to be able to actually look at how we divide some of the innovation work across the sector. So that could be something that we need to consider, so that not everybody's reinventing the wheel and not everybody's trying to do the same thing. It's how do we actually look at the problem, see what needs to be done, and actually try to divide it out across the system so that we actually can progress forward as a whole. So for me, one of the main focuses of my presentation was really around collaboration and how we work together to make things happen and to really realise some of the opportunities that we have.
And so much of this seems to feed into, I think you also mentioned digital transformation. Is a really major sort of a foundation, isn't it? For what it all has to feed in, doesn't it?
And the concept of dual transformation as well. So we know that we have a complex system. We know that we have many existing systems and platforms. So how do we maintain those, but also then create that future vision and actually work towards that? So it's really trying to introduce that concept of dual transformation. So that was another key piece.
That's great. Anne-Marie, thank you so much, and exciting times ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.